Senator Ted Cruz joins us. Nice to see you, Senator.
Good to see you, Greta.
Obviously, you blame President Obama, and I'll get to that in a second. But first, does the Republican Party bear any of the responsibility of blame for the situation we have right now at the border?
Well, sure. Look, both parties bear some of the responsibility because we failed to secure the border. And we should have secured the border. We should have done our basic job a long time ago. That being said, what's happening at the border right now, the direct and proximate cause of it is President Obama's amnesty. This was all triggered in 2012 when President Obama unilaterally granted amnesty.
And when you say amnesty, I mean, that's the sort of the code word that the Republicans use. You're talking about the executive order, which does what?
Right. Well, if you look at the data, if you look at the evidence, and you and I are both lawyers, we're a big believer in looking at the facts and seeing where they lay. The facts here, in 2011, there were roughly 6,000 unaccompanied children apprehended trying to cross into this country. Then in June of 2012, the president signed an order that granted amnesty to some 800,000 people who had entered illegally as kids. What it said is, even though you broke our laws, even though you're not entitled to be here, we're going to allow you to stay. We're going to give you a permit to work. And it was deliberately, it was directly targeted to people who had entered as kids. Now, the predictable consequences, the predicted consequence of that is that it created an enormous incentive for more kids to come in. If you're granting amnesty to people who come as kids, other kids will come. And it's gone now from 6,000 children in 2011 to it's expected to be 90,000 children this year and 145,000 next year. They're coming because they believe they will get amnesty, President Obama's amnesty. And if we want to solve the problem, the only way to do it is to eliminate the promise of amnesty.
All right, so we have the situation we have. How do you sort of reverse engineer? Let's say that for some reason the president's watching this. He says, you know, Senator Ted Cruz got a great idea. I'm lifting that. Right. Now we still have all those kids still down the border, right? We still have that problem. What do we do?
Well, your first question about how you eliminate the promise to amnesty, the most simple and direct way, I've introduced legislation in the Senate. It's very short. It's just 2 pages. And it says the president does not have the authority to grant amnesty to any new immigrants who come into this country. You know, one of the things that's really disturbing is just a few months ago, President Obama asked his Secretary of Homeland Security to prepare a plan for how President Obama could grant amnesty to 5 or 6 million more people here illegally. And I think the president intends to do it just a few months before the election, just like he did in 2012.
All right, I mean,
if we pass into law an explicit provision that the president can't do this, that goes a long, long way to eliminating the promise of amnesty, which is why these kids are coming.
All right, let me go to a related topic, which has to do with the authority of the president. You clerked in the United States Supreme Court for the Chief Justice Rehnquist, and now just passing tonight, the House has passed a resolution giving the green light to Speaker Boehner to sue the president. The big question is whether they have the, quote, standing, whether they have the ability, the power, the authority to go to court and sue. What to put on your legal hat?
Well, it's a difficult question. Look, what has prompted the House to do this, and this is unprecedented, the House as an institution has never sued the president before. What's prompted it is we've never had a president like President Obama.
But that's not the question. The question is, you know, I realize the problem. I realize the problem. I realize the Republicans' objection. But is this the way to figure out, you know, what are the parameters of a presidential power? Can the House does the court have the authority to make that decision?
I think there is a serious and credible argument that the House has standing. A court might agree, it might not, but it's a credible argument. The reason they were forced to file it is, and one of the things that I've done as the ranking member on the Constitution Subcommittee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, is released a series of 5 reports detailing the lawlessness of this president. And when the president refuses to enforce the law, the challenge is there have been very few people who have standing to challenge it. The House as an institution is trying to act to fix that. It's making a plea to the courts to uphold the law and uphold the president's constitutional authority and responsibility to take care that the laws be faithfully executed.
You know, it's too bad. I mean, it's trying to figure out the breadth of any president's power. You know, we ought to be able to figure out. It's got to be defined someplace somehow. And if it's not in the court this way, is there any other constitutional vehicle to figure out the limits of this president or anyone?
Sure. For every other president, the way you figure out the limits of the president's authorities in the text of the Constitution and the text of the law. What this president asserts is unprecedented. 28 times with Obamacare. He has just unilaterally said, I'm changing the law. You and I were taught in law school.
But there's some executive discretion. I mean, you know, there's some executive discretion.
There is executive discretion, but there's not discretion to change the text of the law. So, for example, the text of Obamacare says the employer mandate kicks in January 1st, 2014. There's no ambiguity. January 1st, 2014 is spelled out. He said, no, it doesn't. I'm granted an exemption for members of Congress. Just last week, we had a decision from the D.C. Circuit Federal Court of Appeals, a huge decision on Obamacare, that concluded for 36 states across this country that President Obama's administration illegally extended Obamacare to those 36 states, illegally extended the individual mandate and the employer mandate.
And the problem is, a couple hours later, the Fourth Circuit, which is a companion appellate court, said just the opposite. So, in other words, never dull. We'll find out what the court says. Senator, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Greta.